So I would like to take now just about 5 minutes, and then we'll take questions. Something that's on my mind. Thank God things are moving our way. And I think many of us thought that way too. There was a period in the last few weeks that you had some voters that were trying to vent their frustration. Maybe they don't like the way the president tweets, and maybe they don't always like his personality. But I always felt, and I told my wife, that when it came down to the time when people had to make a decision, as adults, no more venting, a decision based on who is going to keep them safe, who believes in them, who's going to protect them, who's going to provide them an economy that would give them work that they choose, not work that the Democrat Party decides that you should do. It's not up to them to decide that, well, you should be in solar business or you should be in the wind business. Many of these coal miners, they love being coal miners. I met someone who's an excellent reporter on one of the news networks, on Newsmax. Her father was a coal miner. He loved being a coal miner. It's not up to the Democrat Party to decide, well, you're going to be in this, you're going to be in that. And they've been telling this for years to the American people. What if someone says, I love the oil industry. I love the timber business. I love raising cattle. That's very important. People should do what they love. And so now finally people, as we approach the time to pull the lever for the destiny of the American people, of America's future, people are realizing that the man that will protect them and not defund the police, and the man who's proud to be an American, who's someone who is really authentically American, he wears the badge of made in the USA with pride. They're now, when it comes to the voting time, I think more and more of them are going to say, that's what we want. Where is the Achilles heel? The Achilles heel, that's why this meeting tonight with the women is so important. The only Achilles heel from what we hear are what are called suburban moms, women that live in the suburbs. And most of us are women or married to women who live in suburbs. And so we know these people. They're our neighbors. We shop with them. Our kids share schools with them. And so it's this group of women, many of whom who live in suburbs or really fraternize with women that are out in the suburbs. They have a chance to influence those women and that demographic and to tell them the following thing, which is, tell me, you don't like the way the president tweets, but he is going to protect you. Do you like feeling safe? Especially as a woman, it's a woman's issue. A woman should feel that when she's walking in her neighborhood, that they're not going to be attacks from Antifa and Black Lives Matters in her neighborhood. We all know they've announced it. Antifa and Black Lives Matter has announced that they're going into the suburbs. They're no longer just going to destroy places in downtown. They're going to go where the people live in the suburbs. If there are no police, we are not protected. There's not some magic halo that just hovers over America and says you are protected because you live in a suburb. You are protected because there's real life living police. And if you have mayors and governors that don't like the police, they want to defund the police, they want to make the police social workers, your safety as a suburban mom is in jeopardy. Will you be able to just walk in the street with the same confidence and serenity as before, knowing that the police are defunded, knowing that the Antifa and Black Lives Matters and all these other anarchist groups know that the police have been defanged, they have nothing left? What about your children? What about your husband? What about your home? So this is a woman's issue. And it's got to be, for a serious person, that has to be more important than the fact that you might not like the president's tweet. These are serious issues. And you know, all throughout history, women made sacrifices in order to protect their children, to protect hearth and home and their family. And I would tell those women, but you'd have to tell them in the way that women know how to talk. I'm not necessarily such a sensitive and soft spoken person, but you would know the language. If the sacrifice that you have to make for your children's safety, for your safety, for your home safety, is that maybe you have to hear or listen to some tweets that you don't like, that really in the scheme of things is a minor sacrifice. When you think of what women had to do during World War I or World War II, when they had problems, what they had to do for their families, if you have to live through a little bit of a tweet, is that your sacrifice to protect your children? I think you can rise up to that occasion. Many people are unfortunately afraid of what other people think. It's a vanity thing. They want to be considered sophisticated. They want to be accepted. But sometimes vanity is dangerous. And it is vain when people will be willing to forego their safety because the Democrats will defund the police. The Democrats are not going to stand up to the squad. They're not going to stand up to the governors and mayors that are already defunding their police. And you've got to be able to overcome that vanity that says, well, I don't want my neighbor to think I'm mean-spirited. I don't want them to think I'm not sophisticated. I don't want them to think, listen, that's vanity. And to be vulnerable, leave yourself unprotected because of vanity is the wrong thing. So whatever the language is, that's up to people who know how to form that language. But these are the ideas. And the second thing is regarding the low-income housing, they are intent. It started in the Obama era, but it was stopped by President Trump. They are intent in going into these suburban areas and installing low-income housing. It has nothing to do with race, but it has to do with the history where we know there's trouble when these low-income housing come next to your house. You have a right. People have to feel this. You have a right when you've worked hard your whole life, you've sacrificed, you've played by the rules for the one thing, to have a safe home, a nice home, for your children to go to a good school district. You have that right as an American. And you shouldn't forfeit that right. And they want to take that away from you. That's all part of this Marxism, all part of this leveling of the field, being done by people who themselves, though, will never suffer. They live in gated communities, or they lived in Fifth Avenue, or they live in Central Park West, or they live in some gated community in Santa Monica. They will not suffer, but the average middle-class person who's entitled to that life he worked for will suffer. And so these are serious issues. And I think that for this moment, people should wipe away vanity and wipe away maybe their discomfort about a tweet and do what's right for themselves and for their family. And now I'm ready to take any questions.
Right. Well, Rabbi, thank you so much. I was going to ask you a question, but I believe you answered it so eloquently already. I wanted you to share how you first became involved, but you have shared with us your love for America. And I know that's why you are involved in this cause. So Anne, I'm going to let you go on to your question that you had.
Thank you so much, and I'm so pleased to do that. Rabbi, we're all thankful for the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. The women and I have been in DC and doing everything possible from day one to support her. Before her confirmation, in your recent article in the Washington Times, you wrote that, quote, "Those who use the bench for social activism and social engineering evince arrogance, a master of the universe attitude at odds with a biblical mandate for judicial humility." Was the recent SCOTUS nomination an open window to larger issues, both on a religious scale and a political one?
Well, that's what this was all about. The Democrats want to use the courts for social engineering and for social planning and for decisions to be made so as to achieve their vision of how society should look. What the founders believed was that the people should decide how their society operates and how their society, what it values, and put those values into law. It was not for an elitist group from up high, like they used to have in these communist states, these 5-year plans. It wasn't for an elitist group up high to decide how all Americans should live. That's not a democracy. That's not a republic. That's not freedom. That's just a group of elitists. That's one of the big problems plaguing the Democrat Party and a couple of people that call themselves Republicans. There's a certain sense of self-righteousness, of intellectual superiority or moral superiority, that they should tell us how to live. Now, since they have not been able, thank God, the Democrats have not been able to do this through legislation, because either we control the Senate, the presidency, we control the House, sometimes all, sometimes 2/3, and we control most of the state houses and the governorships. They want to do it through the courts, and it was working that way for them for about 30, 40 years. And the court of all courts is the Supreme Court, so they want a justice who will decide not based on the original intent of the Constitution, but people that find themselves above the Constitution and just use their position on the bench, if it's a lower bench or certainly the Supreme Court, to put into action a social agenda not approved by the American people, but by a group of elites, which are against most of our values. That was what is at stake. They came up against Amy Coney Barrett. They thought that maybe they could derail her. First, they were thinking about her Catholicism, but they knew it wouldn't work in an election year. Then her family. That's what they were so frustrated. She was impervious. Her personality, her poise, they couldn't get her. And that's why she sailed through. She should have gotten 95 votes. Ginsburg, who was a social activist, she was a lawyer for the ACLU. She got, I think, votes over 90 because Republicans felt, and they're right, that if someone has the qualifications, you're not supposed to stop them. Now, I don't think she had one of the qualifications, which is judicial humility. I don't know if she was humble as a person, but she did not have judicial humility. She just ran ramshot over the Constitution. So Amy Coney Barrett should have had 99 votes. She didn't. But that's what this was all about. Are we going to be able to continue as a constitutional republic? Or are we going to be a republic that through the judges is ruled by the Upper East Side of Manhattan, the Upper West Side, Georgetown and Washington, and the elites in San Francisco or Malibu? And thank God, we were blessed with this candidate who was so sterling that at least temporarily, she's going to save the republic.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. The intolerance from the left has been awful this year, as we all know. In cities with liberal leaders, there's been outrageous actions allowed: looting, murder, holding citizens hostage in their homes, destroying their property and their businesses. Has this caused, do you believe, religious leaders to get more involved in protecting our freedoms? And if not, what can we do to encourage our religious leaders to be more involved?
Well, this is a great question. Religious leaders by nature are rather timid, except for those on the left. They seem to have a great moxie because many people who went into religion from the left went in because of their liberation theology to begin with. They went in because of their social activism. Marxism for them is a religion. And they went into the clergy world, not so much to implement the Bible, but to use the Bible to implement their predisposed Marxism, this socialism. Many of them are socialists. But religious leaders, by and large, are rather timid. They're not businessmen. This happens to be, just as an aside, one of the frightening things that we've seen lately, that businessmen have become timid, that businessmen are now capitulating and appeasing Black Lives Matters and Antifa and all these players. Businessmen are, this we never had before. They usually had some moxie, but religious leaders, it's very important. And I have this book I wrote called Pushback, Reclaiming Our American Judeo-Christian Ethos. And in it, I write, beyond political correctness, there's this, what I call religious correctness, where religious leaders always want to be perceived as tolerant and compassionate and loving. And right now, unfortunately for us, the vocabulary and the narrative is that compassion means socialism and tolerance means accepting that which is really intolerable. And loving is loving your enemy to the degree that you're willing to commit suicide. So number one, we've got religious leaders that are timid. And number two, we have a problem that our religious leaders, beyond being timid, they don't deep down believe that the blueprint of the Bible is necessarily compassionate, and they've got to be convinced. We have two ways to try to change that. Ministers, rabbis have to hear from their congregants. Rabbi, pastor, we're not happy with the socialism, the statism that you are preaching. We're not happy with it. They have to know that. Now, it's a little bit more difficult when you have a priest, a Catholic priest, because he's not hired by the congregation. He is a servant of the diocese, of the bishop. And so he's not able to change that much based on what the congregation tells him. But certainly in Jewish and Protestant denominations, the minister or the rabbi, his continuation as a clergyman over that congregation does depend upon the congregation being pleased. And if the congregation feels that the clergyman is going beyond and is preaching socialism, and worse, socialism in the name of the Bible, he should be told that.
I think you answered my next question, so I'm going to jump to another one, Rabbi. What is your assessment of the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop and the recent press conference by Bublinsky? Since reportedly over 1/3 of the public has already voted, do you think this will have any effect on the election?
Well, first of all, I think it's true. I don't think that this is made up. In contrast to the dossier that was concocted against Donald Trump, and it was a fraud, I think that what we have here is true. And because some people have voted, well, they didn't have this information. That's why I'm not for early voting. I am for absentee ballots, which I've had to do a couple of times, where you actually go down to the Board of Elections and you show them your identification. You have to be there, fill out a form. You've got to do proactively something, because you might not be able to be there on election day. But generally, I think people should have to wait until election day. This idea of what we're going to start, what do we start electing people 2 months before, 3 months before, 4 months before, then you don't have an election day. It's just like it used to be in the old days. Campaigning started on Labor Day and went from Labor Day until the election day. Now, since the Clintons came into office, the campaigning became year-round. We're going to do the same thing now. What, we're going to have year-round electioneering? It's ridiculous. Republicans would never have come up with such an idea. So not as many people will decide their vote based on this story, because, as you say, so many have voted. And then, of course, those people that have voted, many of them won't even know about this story because they've embargoed the story. They've censored the story, which is all part of the arrogance of these people at Twitter and Facebook. The arrogance of these people. They should no longer be given press privileges because they're not doing the duty of the press. The duty of the press is to inform the public. They're not doing that. What they're doing is they're an arm of the Democrat Party, or they're the arm of the liberal agenda. They shouldn't have press privileges. So we're not going to get as much mileage out of it. But what we will get is those people that do follow the news, they're eventually going to find out about this. It takes time for these things to seep through. If this was disclosed maybe a week or two earlier, we'd have more time for the seepage. But for those people that were on the fence, I think this will make a difference, because Biden tries to claim that he's such a gentleman and a fine person. And if people start to think that, well, maybe the guy is corrupt, it's Ukraine, it's China, it can have an effect on many people. And some of these races are close races. If you can pick up an extra 50,000 in Pennsylvania, and an extra 20, 50, 30,000 in Florida, it does make a difference. So it's better to have the story than not to have the story.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now it's time for our Q&A from our members. And we are going to start with a few questions that were emailed to us. Then we will ask the audience to raise your virtual hand, and then we will recognize you and you will unmute yourself. This first question comes from Leslie Fitzpatrick, who is the president of the Georgetown Area Republican Women's Club. Her question is, what do you think about Pope Francis's recent endorsement of same-sex civil unions? How do you think his endorsement will affect the presidential election?
I don't think it will have any effect on the presidential election. And unless you're in the Catholic world, the religious world, a lot of people haven't heard about it, but it really has nothing to do directly with the presidential election. I think that the Biden story is corruption. The big guy who took 10% of the payoff from his son, he sent his son out to collect the money to be the outside man, and he reaped a 10% benefit. You know, you're supposed to give 10% to the Almighty. So his sons and the business partners need to give 10% to the big guy. So I think that it will not have as much effect. At first, I was actually rather astonished that the Pope did that. But really, although it was disappointing, he did not say that it should be recognized as marriage. Now, my whole argument has always been that people of the same sex, in the eyes of the Bible and God, because I view the Bible as the word of God, that is not marriage. There's a special word in Hebrew for marriage. It's called kiddushin. Kiddushin means sanctification, a partnership of sanctification. So it's not marriage in the biblical sense. It is not a sanctified union. And the Pope still says that is so. It's not marriage, but he allowed for civil unions. And that was a way for him not to alienate people who are homosexual from the church, yet to keep a certain type of fidelity to the church teaching that marriage it's not, and marriage it cannot be recognized. So there are other things that I must say, I usually try to keep out of it because I'm not a Catholic, that bother me. The Pope's absolute intoxication with the green movement, with the environmental movement, not understanding, number one, how it affects people's jobs and their health. We can't live on wind, and this is foolish, and can't live on solar. There are certain things that require the fossil fuels, and that's why God put it there. There's nothing in this world that we have that wasn't implanted as a gift from God. He put into the ground minerals and stones, and he put into the ground these fossil fuels, or the mechanism for them to evolve into fossil fuels, oil and coal. These are all gifts of God, and it's our duty as men, partnership with God, to extract from God's Mother Earth those things for our benefit. So I think his radical environmentalism, his anti-capitalism, and his antipathy towards America, it comes through. He does not like America. That bothers me more.
Rabbi, this one comes from someone you know, Peter Matuza of New York. Recently in New York, there's a crackdown on Orthodox Jewish community by de Blasio and Cuomo. Two Democrats, one is the mayor of New York City, the other the governor. They are protesting. The Orthodox Jewish community is protesting. Do you think this will get traction, and will other groups get behind them? And do you feel that they are being singled out?
They are being mentioned more than other groups because they have, with full gusto, publicly defied the guidelines that have been given out by the mayor and the governor. And you take a chance. You want to publicly defy it, and you want to have weddings with lots of people and things like that, well, there's going to be pushback. And so the reason that they're in the news more, and the reason that the governor and the mayor, who I do not like, the reason though they're more focused on them is because these Hasidic group, I wouldn't call them Orthodox, I'm Orthodox. They are Orthodox in the general sense, but they're a specific type, they're called Hasidic. They have made a case, they've called this their religious rituals that should not be in any way intruded upon by the government. And so they've made a case for it. And they publicly sort of like said, well, we dare you. And so the governor says, all right, you dare me, this is what I'm going to do. I don't think that the governor and the mayor are anti-Semitic, but what it has done, because it has been a little heavy-handed, a little too heavy-handed, it has solidified now those groups to become Republicans. Because what the mayor and the governor have done is they've gone beyond just enforcing their guidelines or their laws. They've done it with a heavy hand. They're going into people's private homes. They're going into people's basements. It's a little too heavy-handed. And so the Hasidic groups, in a way, made the governor and the mayor push back. But then the mayor and the governor pushed back way too much. It became dangerous. And now these groups they've become Republicans, which is good. It's always good. Anything that makes people Republicans is good. You know, the hand of God is a very interesting thing. Obama, for example, thought he would support Iran. And that way it would hurt America, but it would threaten Israel. Oh, and Obama loved to threaten Israel. It ended up, because he did that, all these Sunni Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, they were so afraid of Iran having been built up by America, they decided they had to partner with Israel in order to stay safe. So Obama meant to hurt Israel, it ended up helping. And the same thing, Cuomo and de Blasio, they ended up helping President Trump and the Republican Party. So I say the hand of God is a marvelous thing.
Certainly is. Eileen and I are seeing that our audience has been busy writing questions. Please raise your virtual hands, and Eileen and I will call the name of each person who raised their hand, and then when you're recognized, you will be unmuted. Eileen, you want to call on the first person if you see anyone here?
Okay, I see a raised hand by, I see Earl Moore. Her hand is raised.
Thank you. This is Earl from Spokane, Washington. Thank you, Rabbi Spero. This has been very, very educational for me. And I thank you for your time. Oh, sorry, I have my TV on. I shut it off. My question is, I have lots of Jewish friends here in Spokane, Washington, who are very, I don't know if it's anti-conservatism, but it appears anti-Trump. And they do not like Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you have an explanation or an understanding of why? And the other question I have is, how do you feel about the embassy moving to Jerusalem, good or bad? Thank you.
The embassy moving to Jerusalem is one of the greatest events in certainly in this century, and one of the greatest events in the modern world. Jerusalem finally was given the recognition, the divine recognition that it deserves. It is the capital of Israel. It was made so by King David, King Solomon afterwards, and has been the capital of the Jewish people when they lived in Israel. And when they were in temporary exile, it was the capital in their heart. And although many of the Jewish people were exiled, but there always was a group that remained in Jerusalem, and it was President Donald Trump who righted the wrong. The wrong was that the world did not allow Israel to announce its own capital, which every country does. And certainly it was wrong because Israel has a history of a connection to Jerusalem. So President Trump did this. It's wonderful. And he should be applauded for that. And for those Jews that don't applaud that, I just say they have a Jewish screw loose. There's something missing in their Jewishness. A Jew who is not thrilled by the most powerful country in the world, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, his Jewishness is deficient. There's a screw loose. We're all trying to figure this out. Why is it so? What has happened to many people in American Jewry? But it's interesting. They don't like President Trump and they don't like Netanyahu because they're both conservative. They're both free market people. They're both capitalists. Benjamin Netanyahu, the greatest thing he did for Israel was he took it away from a certain embedded romance with socialism that was part of the original country's founding. It was founded by Jews who came from Russia. And in those days, socialism was the very avant-garde thing. And so they are both capitalists. They believe in free markets. They also believe in a strong military. Benjamin Netanyahu believes in that. Benjamin Netanyahu also is a Zionist. That means that he believes in the specialness of his country. And President Trump is an American first person. He believes in the specialness of the country. So they don't like Trump and they don't like Netanyahu because unfortunately, many of them are on the left. People on the left do not like the concept of America first for America. And they're not strong Zionists either. They're globalists. They feel that every country should just be somehow a place where everybody to come and do whatever they want, but there shouldn't be any distinct culture. A conservative believes in a distinct culture. It conserves. A conservative conserves the culture, the traditions, the way of life, the laws, its history. That's what a conservative does. And most Jews, unfortunately, are not conservative. They are liberal. And the reason is because unlike their forefathers, they have unfortunately abandoned much of our religion. And people look for something to replace religion because people need something transcendent in their life. If it's not religion, what is it? For some, it's politics. And then socialism certainly fits in because socialism just says, oh, I believe in universalism and all men should have the same. Not that all men are created equal, much more than that. All men should have the same amount of everything. But the irony is that many of these people, the Jewish people, they've thrived because of capitalism. And they are safe because of American nationalism, and Israel is safe because of its Zionism. And both countries, Israel and the United States, are safe because they have strong militaries and strong cultures and patriotism. And yet, because they're leftists and they're brainwashed by this leftism, it's a type of religion. When you look at people on the left and how zealous they are and frenzied, and you can't explain it, it's because leftism has become for them a religion, and they become blind to the benefits of capitalism, free markets, a strong defense, nationalism. They become blind, even though they have been beneficiaries of those blessings.
We have I believe we had a question from Irene Alter.
Yes, hi. Can you see me?
Hi, Irene, I can see you all the way
Okay.
to Long Island.
Yes, right. It's great to see you again, Rabbi Spero. And as you know, it's been terrific over the years how we have worked together on different projects. And I wanted to ask you if you could share with everyone. I know that when you were in Washington after the convention, that you did have an encounter and others that you know with the Antifa group. And what was it, your impression of them and what they are trying to accomplish? And if at all that night, perhaps it actually worked against them, because I think a lot of people found out who they actually are because it really got out there after that, especially with Rand Paul. So if you can share some of that.
Before I talk about that evening, you asked, what do they want to accomplish? They want to intimidate us and browbeat us into submission. What they want to do is to take over and to make the country into their own type of fascism. It's always been a trick of the left to accuse regular citizens of crimes that these regular citizens are not committing, but the left is indeed committing. And what you do is you project the crime onto the regular citizen when you yourself are doing it. So they talk about being anti-fascist, as if we're the fascists. We're not, none of us are. They're the fascists, but they cover this up by projecting it onto other people. They would like to take over this country, just like Black Lives Matter would. Some of them are Marxists. Some of them are anarchists. What they all have in common is they hate America. They hate the nuclear family, which I love. They hate the American ideals of free speech. They don't want that. They want you to only say what they will let you say. They don't like the idea of freedom of assembly, because anytime anybody assembles, they come and they try to attack the people. They do attack the people with pipes and bombs and pepper spray. They don't believe in freedom of assembly. They hate the people and they hate the country. And they hope to accomplish that through intimidation. After all, there will be no more assembly out in public by our side if every time you go out there, you're going to be beat up. And if you have mayors of cities like in Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and parts of New York, if you have mayors of cities that are fine with what Antifa is doing or Black Lives Matter is doing, because they don't feel that our side should have any rights, then we're not protected. Remember, it was Cuomo in New York State who told people that were pro-life, get out of the state, you don't belong here. On the day when the New York State legislature passed a law allowing abortion all the way through to the moment before birth, when there's no question at that point, this is a baby, it's a living baby. What's the question? There's a beating heart, there's eyes. And they celebrated it. And many people that were pro-life were against that. He said, you don't belong here. This is a pro-choice state. And the same thing with those people who wanted to exercise their right with the Second Amendment, with guns. He says, you don't belong here. So you have governors like that that feel that our side has no rights. We have no right to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is to give them security guards to protect them with guns, but not for us, for our own protection. So that's what Antifa wants to do. They did that. That was the night we were talking, my wife and I, as we left the South Lawn. The president had been nominated. He accepted the nomination. We were talking to Rand Paul. I've known him for a long time. And he's a very good guy. He has courage, lots of courage. We were supposed to go out with him. We didn't, because I had to talk to someone. We ended up going out with Mark Levine. And then we separated from Mark and his wife, and we started to go to our hotel, which is just basically across the street. But we were told that we couldn't do that because there were gangs. So I figured, okay, why not? It's normally takes 2 minutes. Well, maybe, so we'll go with a little circuitous, different route. It'll take 5 minutes. It took an hour and a half. What got me was it didn't seem as if the police cared. It was like basically you're on your own. And I never had that before in America. These are the police. I don't ask them to bring me a milkshake and a steak dinner, but guide me. Make it safe for me. Let me get back to my hotel room. And what should have been a 2 or 3 minute walk ended up to be an hour and a half. We finally had to get an Uber. And even the Uber had to stop about, I don't know, maybe 500 feet, 1,000 feet away from the hotel because mobs were coming. And we went towards our hotel. And as we did, I said, well, we can't go through the front door because I see all these mobs coming towards the front door of the hotel. Luckily, it's almost like a divine gift. I found a little alley. I said, let's go down that alley. And there was a little side door into the hotel. We made it in. And just as we made it in, there was a whole rush of the mob. They were coming after a fella. I forget his name now. He was a black elected official from Georgia who had spoken that night on behalf of supporting Trump. And they were after him and they rushed to the front doors. This is the United States of America. People on the right would never do it. And if we did do it, we'd all be in jail. Nothing happened to these people. And I said to myself, This is because the mayor told the police, basically, don't interfere with what Antifa wants to do. Or the Black Lives Matters. It was Black Lives Matters too. Don't interfere with them. They're allowed to bash heads. They're allowed to do anything. And that's a dangerous situation when you have mayors like that in DC, in Chicago, partly in New York, San Francisco, and Seattle and Portland. You basically have been told, if you're a Republican, if you're conservative, or you're seen as just a white person, you have no rights. And matter of fact, those that are attacking you, they have more than rights. There is nothing that they do that's considered unlawful. And this is what this vote is all about. And so we have to tell these suburban women who think that they're living in a cocoon, a bubble, and all they have to do is what? They go to Wegmans and then they go over to Prada or whatever they do, and they go in their SUVs and everything is just fine. We're going to vote for Biden because I want quote unquote unity. Then what's at stake here is their safety. And I was, with my wife, a direct target of this. And this was happening with guests from the President of the United States. And there was no fear from Antifa. And the police, short of not letting anybody be killed, they were kind of like, you're on your own, baby. That's what the police tell a citizen, you're on your own. Senator. I'm here.
Oh, good.
Well, it looks like we have come to the end of our show.
It's been
Before you end, can I have about a minute and a half?
I would like to ask you for closing thoughts, if you don't mind, Rabbi, before we do end this show.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that someone brought to my attention before we began. It talked about all these things that are happening in America, and it was written by a professor on our side. He's on our side. And someone said, after reading that, they're just so demoralized, they don't know what to do. But the answer is to do something. You see, it was written by a professor, and professors are very good at theories and explaining conditions. Nothing in that article was revelatory to the degree that we didn't know. We know what's going on in the colleges. We know that the institutions are being taken over by the left. We know this. But the answer is not to say, well, since this is what's happening, we're doomed. We are moral living agents. We can change things. It's called activism. Every person here, I don't care if you're 20 to 75, you talk to people, you tell them how you feel. You go to zoning meetings, you go to the library meetings when they're trying to introduce all this LGBTQ stuff that you're against, not because you're a racist, but because you want to protect a wholesome atmosphere for your children and grandchildren. Get involved. It's not a situation where this is happening and therefore what? We're powerless? We're not powerless. There have been people across the world that have been in far more dangerous situations, far less equipped, with far less money than us, and they made changes. We can fight. And that's our duty. And I want to say one more thing. We all have children and grandchildren, some of us, that are threatening us and saying that if we continue to be a Republican or for Trump, they're going to separate from us and we've got to change. Let me tell you something. My father was a religious, practicing Orthodox Jew. If I would have ever told my father and said, Dad, if you want me to ever come to this house and visit, if you want to see your grandchildren, Dad, you're going to have to stop going to the synagogue. You're going to have to stop practicing the Sabbath. Stop keeping kosher because I don't like it. I find it racist and misogynist and I don't like it. My father would have said, son, then you've made your choice. I'm not going to give up my heritage, my identity, what I believe in. If you have children and grandchildren, please, friends, tell them what you believe, because this country is a heritage. This country is a heritage with a capital H, and nobody should be so intimidated by anybody, even children or grandchildren, and forfeit their heritage as an American and the wonderfulness of this country because someone has threatened you. So at this point, we know what the situation is in America, but we're not helpless. Everybody has to get out there with their ability and powers to fight this fight. This is our country, and we're going to battle for it. And that's what makes us created in the image of God, that we have the power to do things.
Well, Rabbi, it has been not just a distinct privilege, but vital having you here with us tonight, having you join us, especially during these critical hours leading up to elections 2020. We Republican women, we NFRW sisters, we NFR warriors are giving our all to ensure that we protect our nation and all that it stands for, and that we elect Republican candidates who share our principles and values and do that up and down the ballot, capped by President Trump in the White House. Please let us know again where NFRW members can follow you and can read your books and your articles and be inspired by your message, so that we can take our own messages, which are many, to our neighbors and friends, to everyone we know. We are a grassroots up organization. We know our communities. Our communities know and trust us. And as you said, we must share those messages. But through your writings, I think that those writings will enlighten us even more. Where can we follow you and read your work?
Well, if you go to, we have a website, caucusforamerica.com. And the purpose is to preserve our unique and historic American civilization. It is a civilization, it's a heritage. So we post our articles there, our statements. So you can find it at caucusforamerica.com nightly. If I publish something in the Journal or the Washington Times or anywhere else, and eventually it goes onto our website. You can hear me at CRN Digital. You can hear me at crntalk.com. I have a show every night between 8 and 9 o'clock Eastern, and that's where I express myself, and they're very good to me. They let me say what I have to say and keep in touch. And we're part of a existential community. No matter where we are, our hearts share the same love of this country and heritage, and we have to fight. We have to fight, and we'll win.
Yes,
Thank you, Rabbi, so much. I'm watching the chat, and there are so many messages that you have been an inspiration. I know myself, I could have listened to you for another hour or two, but I'm glad I can go to these places and listen to you in the days to come. NFRW sisters, I want to thank you for attending our show. I'm looking forward to our next presentation in November. This has been a wonderful one. Let's all make the most of next week. Let's get out our conservative friends, our neighbors, our family to vote. And I'm looking forward to celebrating election victories with you. Be sure to look in your inboxes for our invitation for our next briefing after the elections.
Friends, till we meet again in person or virtually, be well and be safe. And as Rabbi Spero said, dig deep. Find that message, share the reasons why it is so necessary to vote for our principles and our values, and let everyone you know, your neighbors and friends, your family, and even those whom you don't, why you stand for America. Let's get out the vote. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.